I want to thank you for inviting me to tell my story of my experience on the Indianapolis. Enlisted in December of 1944 and ended up out here in California at Camp Stoneman. So I waited there for a couple of weeks for my assignment to the USS Indianapolis, which was in Mare Island at the time under repair. She got hit by a suicide plane off Okinawa on Easter Sunday of that year, 45. And she made her way back to Mare Island under her own power. We into but 3 months under repair. With everything, she looked brand new. We did a couple of sea trials, and then we got orders to, I was coming home, I was coming back on leave, and all the yard birds were running around, taking stuff off of her, throwing stuff off. We had orders to leave right there, right now, we had to go. And our first stop was in San Francisco, Hunters Point, and they loaded on this secret package. And I didn't see it until she was loaded in the port hangar, and had Marine guards all over it, and nobody knew what it was. And we were all guessing what it was, and some of the guessing wasn't very close. Anyhow, the skipper was told that if anything happens to the ship on the way, that this package goes in a boat before anybody else. Skipper didn't even know what it was. Well, it was, as you probably read about it later, that it was parts of the first A-bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. We proceeded that day to Pearl Harbor, and we dropped off. We carried like 200 passengers besides this package, and the passengers were for guys that had to be dispersed to other ships and stations out in the Pacific. So from Pearl Harbor, we went to Tinian, and we asked, the skipper went ashore, not with that one, no, we unloaded at Tinian and went on to Guam, where we the skipper went ashore, and he was requesting a escort because we were headed out into the Philippines, but that was refused. But she was involved in 10 battles during the war. She carried 10 battle stars, and it was on Easter Sunday. The only scar she got during the war, before we got hit, was when she took a suicide plane off Okinawa, and that bomb went through the ship. 9 guys got killed. The bomb went through the table they were sitting at, and went through the ship, and it blew up outside the ship. Somehow they sealed off that compartment and made their way back to Mare Island. Okay, on the way out to deliver this package to Tinian, we stopped at Guam to load ammunition, and the skipper went ashore to get an escort, but they turned him down and said, "You don't need one. There hasn't been any submarine activity around here for a long time. You don't need an escort." So we left Guam, and the weather was really hot, and we didn't have any air conditioning on Indianapolis. And the skipper let us sleep topside or wherever we could find a place that was cooler. And 2 days out of, so I chose to sleep up under number 2 turret, which was 8-inch gun turret, and my sleeping quarters was down by sick bay, about 3 decks down. And it was really warm down there, so I took a blanket and a pillow and got up under number 2 and made my bed, and And sometime during the night, somebody stole my blanket. I was supposed to go on watch about 4 o'clock in the morning, so I told the guys down there that where I would be sleeping and to come away, if I didn't show up, come and wake me up. Well, about midnight, I was woke up. We took a submarine, Japanese submarine spotted us and shot with the 6 torpedoes and hit with 2. The first torpedo hit forward, right under me where I was sleeping, and it rolled me off this ledge I was on, dropped down about 10 feet, and at that time I looked, my shoes, they were already gone. I was fully dressed because I was waiting to go on watch, and and the fire coming out of number 1 stack, it was blowing all kinds of stuff out of, and I tried to get down my battle station, but there's no way I could get down. There's a fire, and so I crossed the quarterdeck, and there was people running around screaming and hollering. Most of the guys were burned pretty bad, and some were wounded. And I crossed the quarterdeck. There was already a crack in the quarterdeck because the second torpedo hit midships, and she was already listening when I started aft to my shop. I was a shipfitter shop, and my shop was on a fantail, so I was going back to see what's going on. And going through the port hangar deck, there was somebody out in a carpenter shop throwing out life jackets, so I grabbed one and kept on going back aft. And then when I got back to the fantail, there was 2 kids standing, leaning against the bulkhead, and one kid was bleeding pretty bad. And I gave him my life jacket and went back and got another one. And by the time I was coming back to the fantail, I was walking on the bulkhead. She was listing really bad. And I got back to the guardrail, the lifeline, and one of my buddies named Frenchie, this kid escaped from the Germans and joined our Navy, and we call him Frenchie. And he said, "Bray, you better get going. She's going down." I said, "Where am I going to go? You know, what am I going to do?" So he disappeared. He must have floated off, which I could have done. But I wanted to stay dry as long as I could, so I climbed over the rail, and by that time the mast was already in the water, and there was one screw was sticking up out of the water. She was still underway, she was still turning, and I ran down the side of the ship to the quarterdeck, and when I got to the quarterdeck, that's where I decided I better get going, so I jumped off. I was still about 20, 30 feet off the water, and when I hit the water, somebody hit me. It drove me down, and I don't know how far I went down. Anyhow, I opened my eyes, the moon was out, and I seen this big spot. I thought the ship was coming down on top of me, but it broke water, and it was the oil on the water. Then, so I started swimming away from her, and I found this sailor was sitting on a rolled up net. So somehow we got this net untied, and it was a floater net. Had corks, you know, through the hemp rope and 1-foot corks. And so I looked back, and the Indy was up on her bow going down. And there were still guys coming off, and they were like ants on a stick. They were still coming off and hitting the water. And so she finally disappeared underwater, and we started picking up survivors, and we heard yelling all over the guys. We'd yell where we were, and we picked up, we counted up the next morning, we picked up 151 guys that night. And we thought we were the only ones left alive, and we thought that for the next 5 days. The first day in the water, we thought for sure somebody would have heard the SOS, but then we were told there was no SOS. The CIC had been hit, but later years we did find out there was an SOS sent, and it was received in the Philippines. And the kid that received it told his commander what he had received, and the commander or the officer told him, well, if you get another one, let me know. So there was no other one. So the first day, we seen a lot of airplanes fly over. I mean, they were 10,000 feet, so they couldn't see anything. That the water looked like a block of cement from 10,000 feet, I guess. But then, of course, the sharks showed up pretty early, and the guys that were hurt very bad, they never lasted but a couple of days, maybe, if that long. Somehow we got a raft. Some guys had found a raft, and we tied it to the crash net. And the guys that were hurt very bad, we tried to keep them in a raft, but it didn't keep them out of the water. There was a 20-man raft, but there's 30 guys on it, so he was, underwater most of the time. It was never dry. Never dry. There was no dry spots where we were. So anyhow, the second day, we thought for sure we'd get somebody would be missed. We're supposed to be in the Philippines for gunnery practice, and then on to Japan. But when during the war, I guess they didn't. If a ship didn't show up, they just took them off the board, and thinking they were assigned someplace else, and so they never worried about us. And this went on for a couple of days. The second day was the same. No rescue. We've seen airplanes every day, and then of course the guys were disappearing. The third day they started getting hallucinations. They drinking the salt water, and they were fighting each other, and it was worse at night. In the daytime, I'd get away from them. I'd stay around on the edge of the net. I have to get back on this. There was an older sailor on there called Pappy Goff, G-A-F-F. And that Pappy was about 20 years older than I was, and he kind of took me under his wing and told me what to do and what not to do. And so I give him a lot of credit for saving my life. And like I say, the daytime I'd stay around out of the outer edge of the group, and then at night I'd get in on the net, so in case I fell asleep I wouldn't float away. And the kapok jackets that we had were only good for 72 hours, and by the time we got picked up, I was holding mine up. It was so waterlogged with oil that it was dragging me down. And I couldn't. The way I tied it on, the knots, I couldn't take the knots out because everything you touched, your skin was just sliding off. It was after being in the water that long, and so I was picked up with it on. But I don't know if they weighed it or not, but it sure was heavy. Anyhow, the third day, same thing. Airplanes go over, and of course we'd holler and scream at them, but they were just on their way somewhere. And then the fourth day we seen this black dot on the horizon, and we could hear this engine, and he kept coming closer and closer, and pretty soon he was right over us. And the pilot was, they had a broken antenna. This is how we got discovered. He had what was called a trailing antenna, he said. And he was laying down, pulling in this antenna, and went over the oil slick. And first he didn't see us in the slick. So he opened the Bombay doors. Of course, he was on patrol to get Jap subs, but he went over, and then he looked down and seen his little heads bobbing around in the oil, and he went by. I said, "Oh, he's leaving." So he went over, he gave us the wing thing that he had saw us, and he went out over the horizon, came back and did it again. And I guess he radioed his base what he'd see, and his words were to the base, ducks on the pond. So he stayed with us as long as he could, and he was dropping stuff, and I guess he dropped a couple of rubber rafts, which I never got on, but he dropped cigarettes, no matches, we had to chew them, but then he dropped some kind of water that you mix with the seawater to drink, and it was terrible stuff. Then he had dropped what I thought was a tank of water. So I left the group. I swam to this thing. What it turned out to be was a submarine detector. It was a tank with an antenna and a microphone down in the water. In later years, the pilot lived at San Jose for a long time till his death. And he told me, well, you could have pulled it up and talked to me. I said, I want to talk to you. I want a drink of water. So I didn't go back to the group because they were screaming and hollering. I thought that sharks were after them. So there was a raft with 2 guys on it. And I swam to it, and it was just a ring, 20-man raft, with the Navy raft and the netting and stuff. Well, this one didn't have any. It was just a ring. And I got on with these 2 guys, and they disappeared sometime during the night. I don't know what happened to them, unless they got in a raft and didn't invite me. So I was sitting there by myself. And sometime early the next morning, on the 5th day, this big floodlight hit me. This rescue ships were showing up about that time. And they hit me with this big floodlight, and I said, if it's a Japs, I'm getting on anyhow. So they pulled up with the Higgins boat, and they threw a ladder over the side, and it said, hey, sailor, can you climb it? Hell yeah. I couldn't even lift my arms out of the water, so they jumped in and put me on the Higgins boat and into this net, and a basket net. And I don't remember them picking up anybody else with me. And they took me back to the Bassett, which was at an APD. It was a transport, a demolition transport. And the ocean was kind of rough that morning, and they had me strapped in this thing. Anyhow, the Higgins boat would go down, the ship would go up, and I went sailing through the air. I said, oh, brother, I'm going back in the water. But they finally got me on the deck of the Bassett, and as soon as I hit the deck, I went out like a light. I don't remember anything, but I woke up once during this rescue thing, and there was some kid cleaning out the oil out of my eyes, and I grabbed his arm. He said, "That's okay, sailor." So I went back to pass out again. And I didn't really wake up till we got into the Philippines at the hospital there, and we were there for 3 or 4 weeks under treatment for exposure and whatever wounds you had. And what happened to a lot of guys, these K-pop jackets would rub on you, and that we had a lot of scars from the K-pox rubbing your skin off, and also the saltwater blisters, they called it. We had blisters all over us from, and you know how they cured that? They pull the skin off. I said, what the hell are you doing? That hurts. That's how they cured it, and I don't know what they do today, but that's how so they would dry up, I guess, right? So anyhow, we were there, while we were, this was a new hospital in Samar, Philippines, and years later, this kid called me from Missouri, and he was one of the Seabees that built that hospital. That was kind of interesting. So we were, while we were in the ward, they had Marine guards around us, and we couldn't talk to anybody. Of course, they gave us things to fill out, what to do and what not to do in the water. We gave them a mouthful there. But I guess they changed a lot of stuff when they told us to, in the water, slap and scream and holler, you don't do that. That attracts the sharks. They come to where the noise is. So we learned a lesson there, but I guess they wrote up the rescue things later in the Navy books, and we told them that don't work. So anyhow, we were in the hospital there for 3 to 4 weeks, and that's when we got there. We found out that we had carried the first atomic bomb, or parts of it. And matter of fact, that we got picked up on August the 5th, and they dropped the first bomb on the 6th. That's when we found out what we had. And then the second one was, I guess they dropped on the 15th. But from there we found out we were not the only ones alive. One group we went to the Philippines, and the other group went to to the hospital ship, and another group went to Guam. So we all met in Guam at the hospital, and then to a submarine rest camp where we stayed for another 3 or 4 weeks. And then we boarded the Hollandia with the Jeep carrier, and we all went home together to San Diego, and that's where they issued us new uniforms, because we still didn't have any clothes, or this what the Red Cross had given us, or somebody gave us some dungarees or something to wear, but we didn't have anything left. And so during the time they were issuing us our uniforms, well, some were too big, some were too small, so they turned us loose in San Diego, and we were getting picked up by the SPs for being out of uniform. So we couldn't win. So we got that straightened out, and then they gave us survivor's leave. We were home, I think, 36 days survivor leave, and then they let us choose where we wanted to be stationed, and I chose a little airfield outside of Detroit, near the water. So I was there. I was there for about a year, and then I got out of the Navy. I thought about re-upping, but I thought about it again and didn't do it. So I ended up out here in California a year after I got out of the Navy, and I stayed home for a year, and it was way too cold because I knew where the sun shined, and so I ended up where I am today in Benicia, California. I've been there since 1948. I worked with the government for about 13 years, and I got on the police department. I served about 23 years with the police in Benicia, and then I met my lovely wife here a few years later, and we've been married now for 34 years. Thank you. I want to thank you for inviting me to do this story. Oh, hold on. I got a question here.
So, how many survived the sinking, and how many of you still remain?
So there's 317 of us survived it, and today there's 26, and I'm the youngest, so you know what the rest of them look like. And too, I'm getting an eye from my wife here. I forgot to tell you that after the war was over, and they court-martialed our skipper for, I forget what the charge was. Anyhow, it was putting the ship in harm's way or something like that, but it was a bogus thing. It was one of the admirals had something going with McVeigh's dad, and he was punished by McVeigh's dad, and I think this was a political thing within the Navy, and we finally got him exonerated, but he never lived to know it. He committed suicide in 1968, I think, over this. He used to get hate mail from the parents of the lost kids when we got hit. So he didn't live to know that he was exonerated, but he just lost points as far as he was admiral, upper admiral, I think it was, but he couldn't command the ship anymore or something like that. But he never lived to know that.
How many men were on the ship originally before it hit?
But I got to have an interpreter. I'm hard of hearing.
1,200.
What'd you say?
What was the original crew? The crew of the ship?
I didn't hear that.
How many were on the ship?
How many aboard? Yeah, there was 1,195, and they I don't know how they did this. They said 300 got killed instantly. We were still segregated in those days, and there was the Marines and the blacks and the Filipinos slept forward, and that's where the first torpedo hit. And we had carried a complement of 37 Marines, I think, and 8 survived, and 1 Filipino survived, and there were no blacks survived. Get a question back there.
Any preparatory training or skills prior to this disaster?
Did they teach you anything about how to survive before you were on the ship?
No, they didn't spend much time on telling you how to survive. It's in boot camp anyhow. I don't remember any of that.
I have one question, sir. I've read all the accounts and seen all the movies. Which account is the most accurate?
Well, I'll tell you what, the first movie they came out with was bogus. It was terrible. Stacy Keach was the captain, and it was a terrible movie. And now they're in the process of doing another one, but they haven't contacted any survivors yet, so I don't know what that's going to be. We are working with National Geographic, and I went down and was interviewed by them in LA about 2 months ago, and so did 5 other survivors. And they're going out to look for her sometime this year. And they asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, I got a request for you. I said, if you find her, leave her alone, and don't ask me to go.
Question, Admiral.
Just a quick question. We know that you not only had the ordeal floating in the water for 5 days, but you also had problems with sharks. Can you tell us anything about what you did to try to fend them off, or how that worked?
Talk about fending off the sharks, or how you dealt with the sharks.
Well, as far as the sharks go, I wasn't bothered by them. Maybe they didn't like the smell, but I was fully dressed. I was blue shirt, blue pants, black socks. And most of the guys that got hit were naked or had white skivvies, and they were like a flasher in the water, I guess. And they didn't hit the groups. They singled out guys. I had them hit my legs, swimming under us, but they never bothered me as far as biting me or anything. But they did get a lot of the first 2 or 3 days that there was any blood in the water. Well, they, attracted them.
So you take it from you've actually got to know the pilot who found you?
You got to know the pilot who
Oh
found you?
yes, he turned out to be. A matter of fact, I talked to this group in Vallejo a couple of months ago, was it? And the pilot's wife showed up. That was the biggest surprise to me. And matter of fact, we got an email from her. She wants us to come down to San Jose for lunch or something, dinner or something. But she's still alive down there in San Jose.
Do we know what happened finally to the skipper of I-119?
What happened to the skipper of the submarine that sunk you?
Oh, after the war, they found him, Japan, and they did bring him to the States to testify against the skipper, but he blew a hole in their testimony. He told them that no matter what we were doing, how fast we were going, he would have shot us anyhow. He shot 6 torpedoes and hit with 2. He wasn't a very good shot, by the way, but he got us anyhow. He did tell who's ever in charge of the the trial that didn't do any good. I guess him and McVeigh did meet at one point, and but he did stand up for the skipper. He said it wasn't anything he wouldn't have done any good. You know, we didn't have any sonar. We had everything else on her, but no sonar. It really was strange that they would let us out of the shipyard without a big ship like that, Queen of the Fleet, everything. I want to thank you all.
Another question.
As I recall, the charge of the skipper was that he was not zigzagging.
Charge against the skipper was that he wasn't zigzagging?
You know, that was part of it. That was part of the charge was there was no zigzagging and putting ship in harm's way.